Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making a router rest. Now I can hear it already. Some of you are saying, what on earth is a router rest? Well, whenever you're doing any kind of freehand work with a router, whether it be using it in a jig or whether it be routing out a sign like we did a little while ago with a Beware of Dogs sign, at some point in time you stop routing or you take a break from routing and you need somewhere to place that router. And I really hate laying that router down on its side or upside down. I really hate doing that because, number one, if it's upside down, you're exposing that bit or exposing yourself to that sharp bit. And if you're laying it on its side, it's the same thing. You're asking for trouble. So a router rest is a platform basically that your router sits on while you're not using it. The router is in rest. So what does it start with? It all starts off with some scrap 3/4 inch pine. So to start this project off, I have a 3/4 inch thick piece of scrap pine. I have cut it to be 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches square. Now that measurement did not come around by accident, and in fact I have taken that measurement off of the most commonly used router that I will be having on this stand. In this case it's my Ridgit that I use in my dovetail jig. And if we measure our base, this router has a 6-inch circular base, so an extra 1/2 inch will give you an extra bit of support. So whichever router you're going to use, measure your base and add like 1/2 inch to 1 inch just to make sure that this router plate is fully supported. So at this point now we need to do a little bit of layout here on our 6.5 by 6.5 inch piece of pine. And the very first thing that I want to do is I want to mark the center. Now this center will be a circular cutout, and the size of the cutout will depend on the size of router bits that you use on a regular basis, because you're going to want to be able to have that router bit fit in this hole. There's no sense in having a 1/2 inch diameter hole if your router bit is 3/4 inch. So for my purposes, I have set my compass at a 1.25 inch radius, and we will place right here in the center, we will place a circle that will end up being 2.5 inches in diameter. We now need to draw a little channel that will allow us to get our router into this center section. So first thing, let me just clamp this to the bench here quickly, and we will draw a couple lines that will be the channel that leads into this center hole. So I'm just looking at it. I'm thinking maybe we'll come in 2.5 inches from either side. And what does that leave us with? That leaves us with 1.5 inch channel, and I think that will be just fine. So we will just take a square and mark this off here into our center circle. And at this point, I'm going to take this over to the scroll saw and we will cut this out. And what you end up with is this. At this point now, I want to soften the top edges all the way around on this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 1/4 inch radius round over bit, and I'm going to run it all the way around the entire piece and on the inside of our cut. And at that point, we can give this a good sanding. Well, at this point now we need a couple layout lines. So what I'm going to do is 1/2 inch in from each of our sides. This will be the front, this is the back. So each of our sides, we're going to come in at 1/2 inch and just draw a light layout line. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. And now coming in from the ends, both the front and the back, right on those lines at 1/2 inch, we're going to come in 1 inch and put a mark. And this will be our mounting screw holes. So once we get these done, what we're going to do is we're going to take them over to the drill press. We'll center punch these and drill and countersink for a number 8 screw. Now at this point we need to make our uprights for this router rest, and depending on how deep below your router plate your bit extends, that will determine how deep you want the walls here below this router rest platform. So for mine, I have made them 1 inch wide. It's 3/4 inch pine, 1 inch wide, and I have cut them to be 6 inches long. That will leave them inset by a 1/4 inch on either side. So the first thing I'm going to do on both of these pieces, you need 2 of them, is I'm just going to mark a center line. And if you remember, our holes here were inset 1 inch. Well, if this is 1/2 inch shorter than this, and it's a 1/4 inch in from each side, because this is 6, this is 6.5, to center it, you need a 1/4 inch on either end of it to get it centered. That means that our holes, our pilot hole for our screw, will only be coming in here at 3/4 inch in from the end. I hope that made a little bit of sense to you. So at 3/4 inch in from each end, right on that center line, we are going to place a mark. We will do this on both of our upright pieces, and then we will drill a pilot hole for a number 8 screw. And once you get that done, we can just apply a little bead of glue here to our upright or our side wall. You don't need a lot, it's just to assist the screws in holding it in place. And then we will screw this to our base. Now, guys, this is pine, and I know that a lot of you guys out there, myself included, we love our power tools. And we love those little 1/4 drive impact guns for driving screws, our little screw impact drivers. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you go using that on something like pine, you're going to end up splitting it. So honestly, just use a screwdriver and do it manually. All right, so we're going to get this screwed together, and once we get this all said and done, we'll clamp it up and we will let this dry. And just to give it that little extra bit of professionalism, guys, don't forget to clean up your squeeze out that's come out the sides of our upright boards here. And when it's all said and done, you end up with this. Now, I know it's not fancy, it doesn't look much, but what it is really, really handy. So what do you do with it? Well, for starters, I wouldn't suggest just using it like this sitting on your bench. I prefer to have it so that it is clamped in place. And if you have bench dogs, that will help you a lot because you can get it really solidly on there so that it isn't going anywhere. But any time that you are routing from that point forward and you're using your router, now you shut it off and it's spinning down. What do most of us do? Well, we spin this upside down and sit it on its head, and now you've got a live spinning bit whirling around here at who knows how many RPM with very sharp edges. Anything could happen. If the router tips and your reflexes are to grab it, you're going to the hospital. You're hitting the ER for a couple stitches minimum. So this router rest, you do your routing, you shut off your router while it's spinning down. This 2.5 diameter hole here is deep enough that you can just plunk it down just like that on your router rest and let it finish winding down. The slot in the front here would make it so that if you didn't feel comfortable plopping it down like this, you could bring it to the front and slide it in until it's centered on your router rest. But it can sit there and wind down until it completely stops with no harm to anybody. The bit is concealed up underneath. It is completely away from your fingers. You're out of harm's way, and it can sit there as a platform to hold until you're ready to do your next cut with the router. And when you're ready, you just pick it up, start your router, do your little job. Yeah, don't do it like this. It could be a crazy kind of route if you did that. But then you shut it off, sit it back in your stand and let it wind down. So from the bottom of the router plate to the bottom of your bench, you have the 3/4 of an inch thickness of your stock and your 1 inch width or height of these side braces. If your bit is going to protrude more than 1 3/4 or even come close to 1 3/4 below your router plate, I would make these a little bit longer. Or a little bit wider rather, just to give you that extra height. But don't go too crazy. I would not bring this over 2 inches because then you're getting into height and then you're getting into instability, even if it's clamped down. You really don't want a tall platform here. So keep it small, keep it simple, keep your fingers away from the router bit, and make yourself a router rest so that you can use it while routing your projects without the worry of having to lay your router on its side or upside down, exposing the router bit. And there you have it, a shop-made router rest. Guys, I used to make these years ago, and I made them for nothing more than practice with my dovetail jig. I would make these simple boxes with this cutout platform, much like we did today, and that's what I would use to rest my router on while routing dovetails. Now, those old ones were much too high. And actually, if you look at my D4R Pro Lee dovetail jig tutorial, the original one from years ago, you'll actually see my original one there, and it was quite tall. And the reason I stated earlier about I wouldn't go over 2 inches in height for those side legs is because of instability. Those older router stands or router rests were actually too tall, and I did find them to be a little unstable depending on which router I was using. Now, back then as well, I also didn't have bench dogs, so clamping it down was a bit of a challenge. So now with that being said, what are some variations here? Let's say that you don't have bench dogs. How about you make the legs a little longer on one side only, and then that gives you the ability to clamp it from the front onto the front of your workbench. How about if you did have bench dogs, how about instead of using 3/4 inch pine, why not make the entire base a lot thicker Instead of using the legs to be able to lift it up to get your bit in there, make the entire thing that much thicker and use some 3/4 dowel drilled and glued into the bottom and spaced just right so that it fits into your bench dog holes. How about that? You just plunk it into your bench dog holes, no need to clamp, it's stable, it's sturdy, and ready to use whenever you want it. There are plenty of variations of this project, guys, and I know that some of you out there are thinking, man, this is just stupid simple. Yeah, it is very simple, but some of the simplest projects in the world are some of the best. Some of the simplest concepts are the ones that work the greatest. I'm pretty sure that somebody somewhere along the line thought that a sanding block was a pretty simple concept when they just stuck a piece of sandpaper and wrapped it around a square block of wood way back when. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. Again, it is a simple project, it is an easy one, but it's one that I thought was relevant. I had a viewer looked at my Lee D4R Pro tutorial and they really liked the idea of that router stand, and then I thought to myself, you know what, let's revisit this project and remake this for all the things that I've learned with not having it too high and that sort of thing. Bring that to today's standard kind of thing, make it a little safer, make it a little better, a little simpler so that it's accessible to all different levels, and then bring it to you to the show today. Now, if you don't have a scroll saw and so you can't cut out that center, that's hogwash. You don't need a scroll saw. You could use a fret saw. You could use a hole saw in your drill press to drill that center hole, and then use a hand saw to cut straight down through until you break into that hole. You could use Forstner bits. There are many ways to do this project, and the methods that I've shown you here today are nothing more than a suggestion. Use what you've got, rock what's in your shop, and make the project your own. Guys, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You click that bell and then you won't miss the notifications of future episodes of the show. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you're going to try this for yourself and make your own router rest for your shop. And guys, more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.